chapter 4 out of 5. So we are, believe it or not, coming to the end of James. Before we move into chapter 4, um, just kind of a thought that I had while I was doing the dishes, listening to a podcast I think on Friday or Saturday. Um, and so going through James, we've been kind of approaching it as James is writing this letter as kind of, if you follow Jesus, we can tell that you follow Jesus because you act like this. This is how Christians act. This is how we can tell that your faith is vibrant. And I had a thought. What if instead of saying this is how you can tell whether or not someone follows Jesus, what if James is saying this is how a spiritually mature follower of Jesus behaves? And that, I was talking to David Stammerjohn a little bit on Sunday after church, and as we were talking, it seems very clear to me that the vast majority of Christians in America are not spiritually mature. And there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of it is um, we kind of we kind of got stuck on Billy Graham. By which I mean Billy Graham did an excellent job at presenting a version of the gospel that was easily digestible, that was easy to understand. And to his credit, Billy would always say, "Okay, you were saved here, go find a local church."
Yes.
He always did that. But the problem is so much of Christianity stopped at you're saved. Yay, you go to heaven. Because it was effective. Part of it is and we've talked about this a lot going through James. Part of it is that spiritual maturity comes through trial. That's one of the routes one can come to spiritual. It's not the only, but going through difficult times, persecution, things like that, develops spiritual maturity. We see Paul says that, James says that, Hebrews says that. It's all through the New Testament. We have pretty easy lives. Even if you're struggling to pay, well, I won't say that. But I mean, we for the most part have pretty easy lives. Even if we're not wealthy, we're not persecuted for following Jesus. For the most part, we can pay our bills, although I mean that's getting harder and harder for a lot of people. But on the whole, we have pretty easy lives. And so we've been able to kind of stay at a lower level of spiritual development. And so I think a lot of Christians are spiritually immature. A lot of us are emotionally immature too. If I know plenty of adults that have never matured beyond like 14, and again, there's a lot of reasons for that. I'm not being critical. I'm just saying. And so James is saying this is like the pin. What I'm proposing is that perhaps James is saying this is the ideally mature, spiritually mature Christian. Now, I don't know anybody who's reached this level that James is proposing, you know. But I know some people who are close. I'm not one of them, but that's what I'm wondering. And so if James is concerned with spiritual maturity, then while we read James, then we're less concerned with judgment of whose faith is vibrant and whose faith is dead. Because that's a concern of mine going through James, is it's really easy to fall into this Pharisaical pattern of oh, you see, you're not doing enough. Your faith is dead. It's really easy to fall into that pattern of judge if you take James seriously, which we should. The focus turns to who we aspire to be. The focus turns us back to Christ. It moves us away from looking at other people and saying, "Oh, they're not doing enough. They're not real Christians." And it moves us to, okay, this is Jesus. This is who we want to be. Jan.
It's why put the focus over there? It's supposed to be the focus here.
Exactly. And we talked about that last week, right?
Right.
Yeah, we talked about that, about how where we are in our culture, we very much prefer to point out the shortcomings of other people. When Jesus says, "Look at the log in your own eye," right? You're absolutely right. Yeah. And so if James is concerned with spiritual maturity, what he's saying is that mature faith pushes us to live out that faith instead of using that paradigm of dead faith and living faith, right? Mature faith results in more measured speech. Mature faith causes us to be less concerned with our own well-being and more concerned with the well-being of the poor. If we look through James with this lens of matured faith rather than this is how you have to behave, it reframes some of this. I think that's an interesting possibility, but it's not without its problems. Because this has the danger of softening James. And James very clearly has this very sharp rhetorical point. His teeth are very sharp, we might say. He doesn't, he's not wishy-washy on this. We read chapter 3. Chapter 3 was he's very direct. As we move into chapter 4, he's very direct. And he's what I consider harsh. He's harsh. It's hard because he says, if you are in Jesus, then you have to act this way. And so we run the risk of softening him a little bit too much. Because he's very clear that living faith, or saving faith, as he would say, produces works of mercy and justice, while dead faith is content with believing the right things. And that's his language, and it's strong language, and it's language of judgment. Maybe not judgmental language, but it's language of judgment. There's a value judgment there. The faith we want is living faith, that's mercy and justice, while dead faith is just concerned with yourself. We take the risk of softening James too much. And so is this James's legitimate intent to say, to have this binary, yes, no, on, off? You're either following Jesus or you're not, and we can tell by how you act. Is that his intent, or is that just rhetorical flair? I guess that's a question for us to answer as we go through the rest of the letter. Do you understand what I mean by that question?
We're all looking at the baby.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So, yeah, she's being very. I told her, I said, okay, JC, you have to let other people hold Finley because you get to hold her at home. Yeah, so I know you're trying to help. Yeah.
Was
Yeah. So, but yeah, so keep that in the back of your mind. Maybe the answer is somewhere in between, you know? So moving into James 4. So this is chapter 4 of 5. So again, we're coming in. James doesn't have, the big intro and outro like we see in Paul's letters, like we see in Hebrews. James is short, he's to the point. So we're in James 4. And again, I mean, he cuts deep. He doesn't dance around things like Paul does. These conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? Do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder. And you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly in order to spend what you get on your pleasures.
Yeah.
So there's a lot in here. Like 3 verses. There's a lot in here. He says a lot. First thoughts.
It's hard, yes.
Yeah, it is hard. Yeah.
Close, doesn't it?
Yeah. And we'll look at this a little bit more down the road, because James has this line about confront the devil and he will flee. And so we'll look at that a little bit. But there's a little bit of in our culture today, and in the culture of the church in the United States, it is popular whenever there is conflict within the church, someone says something along the lines of, "Oh, Satan is attacking the church," And James says, "No, it comes from you." There is no "the devil made me do it" with James.
One of the things the teacher was like, Jan, I think is that what you dislike or pick up in other people is something within you that is.
Yes.
And that's what he's pretty much saying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's what's within you that is causing this conflict or this dispute.
Mm-hmm.
You need to look at yourself.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, exactly. Well, and this follows directly from the end of chapter 3, which I have to jump through all of this. Because he talks about envy. And right here in verse 16, envy and selfish ambition, right? And he's saying envy and selfish ambition are what are destroying your community. Yeah. And so be aware of what's going on in you, this envy and selfish ambition. You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder. You covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts, Yes.
I have like little sections of blue that kind of talk about it. It says, if you had to distill the message of James into one word, it might be self-control.
Mm-hmm. It very much is. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, and so when you take a step back and you think of conflicts within the church, how many of those conflicts can be traced back to envy and selfish ambition? Not all of them. Sometimes there are good, legitimate conflicts that come down to good, legitimate differences in perspective. So not all conflicts boil down to that, but a lot come down, in my experience, a lot of it comes down to desire for power within the church system.
That is with everything.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wants, I think, power.
Mm-hmm.
It's very active.
And James forces us to take a step back and say, okay, think of the conflicts. Where do they come from? They come from you, like you were saying. They come from you. And Buddhism, we've talked about this before. Buddhism teaches the core of Buddhism is that suffering comes from attachment, from desire for things around you. That's not too far off from what James is saying here. That the suffering, that this conflict comes from your desire for more. And then he ties it to you can almost think that so you think back to the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus says, ask and you shall receive. What child asks their father for a loaf of bread and the father gives them a stone, right? Jesus says, ask and you shall receive. Well, our lived experience, there are Christians who have starved to death. And so we said, well, okay, so what's going on there? Or even like, well, I've been asking for, I don't know, $1 million. Why? Why won't God give me $1 million? Jesus says, ask and you shall receive. Well, James says you ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly in order to spend what you get on your pleasures.
And ask for the wrong reasons.
And you ask for the wrong reasons. Well, now you think of that, and you think of people who preach the prosperity gospel, and Creflo Dollar who says God says I need a new jet plane, and you go, And that same podcast I was listening to, they made a connection I had not made previously, which is, so what led to the growth of the prosperity gospel in the United States? It's the economics of television broadcasting. So you have Christian networks like TBN or what have you. Well, those stations take money to run.
Yes.
So where does that money come from? Well, you can have a pastor who says, hey, I'll pay you and you can put my ministry on TV. Well, who has the money for that? Prosperity gospel preachers have the money for that.
Yes.
And so that's how I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, but yeah, you ask and you do not receive because you ask wrongly. And so many things that we ask for are for our material comfort.
For our own desires.
For our own desires.
What's necessary for me.
Right.
My own peace.
Yeah. And so that, that, again, sharp teeth, right? That hurts a little bit, And so talking about community, these quotes might look familiar to some of you. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote this little bitty book called Life Together. It's about this big. And he wrote it while he was running illegal seminaries in Nazi Germany. And so they, he and a house full of young men would live, in, a rich supporter's big house for 6 months, and then the Gestapo would be on their tail and they'd have to go somewhere else, And so he wrote this while reflecting on his experience. The first chapter of Life Together cuts to the core. Like the first time I read it, I said, oh, I don't like this at all. But the more I come back to it, the more, gosh, he's right. And essentially what Bonhoeffer says is, look, Christian community is unlike any other kind of community. Because what defines Christian community is that we come together in the name of Christ. And we are relating to Christ. And that is the only purpose of Christian community. And so Bonhoeffer says things like, on innumerable occasions, a whole Christian community has been shattered because it has lived on the basis of a wishful image. Certainly, serious Christians who are put in a community for the first time will often bring with them a very definite image of what Christian communal life should be, and they will be anxious to realize it. But God's grace quickly frustrates all such dreams. A great disillusionment with others, with Christians in general, and if we are fortunate with ourselves, is bound to overwhelm us as surely as God desires to lead us to an understanding of genuine Christian community. What he's saying is Christian community can often fails, or at least comes into conflict, because we come to church and we say, this is what church should be. Church should be a place where we all come together and we all like the same music. Church should be a place where we come together and we all agree on abortion or homosexuality or war or politics. Or church is a place where nobody ever argues. Church is a place where everybody agrees and gets along and sings kumbaya around the campfire, right? Like, we bring these ideas of what church is, what Christian community is, because we're bringing our human desire for community to it. And Bonhoeffer says, when you bring that, it's going to fail, because the only thing that ties us together in Christian community is Jesus. And if you bring anything but Jesus into Christian community, you're going to have a hard time. And he has this line. Yeah, he has a lot of lines that just really cut deep. He has one where he says, and I don't have this quote in here, but the person who comes to a Christian community with an idea of what that Christian community should be is saying to everyone around him, you have to do what I want. And he's saying to God, God, you have to make this community what I want. Yeah. And he has this other line, pastors should not complain about their congregations because their congregations are a gift given to the pastor by the Holy Spirit. And who are we to complain about God's gifts? I read that and I said, oh. Because I don't complain about this one, but I've complained about my past congregations quite a bit, you know? Yeah, JC's nodding. She hears it. Yeah, she hears it. Yeah.
It's coming, right?
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I mean that whole chapter, it's just, I mean, the whole thing is but he also writes, if we do not give thanks daily for the Christian community in which we have been placed, even when there are no great experiences, no noticeable riches, but much weakness, difficulty, and little faith, and if, on the contrary, we only keep complaining to God that everything is so miserable and so insignificant and does not at all live up to our expectations, then we hinder God from letting our community grow according to the measure and riches that there are for us all in Jesus Christ.
That's fantastic.
That's a lot.
One of the most brilliant men to ever live, Dietrich Bonhoeffer was. Just brilliant. And this came out of undoubtedly his failures in living. I mean, you've got 20 men living in a house together.
Under horrible conditions.
Under horrible, stressful conditions. And the rest of the book is outlining, wake up early. He kind of patterned it after monastic life. You wake up early, you pray, you eat, you study, you work, But yeah, just and so I read these first 3 verses in James chapter 4, and I immediately thought of Bonhoeffer's reflection on community. And James says, look, these conflicts within your community are because you bring your own selfish desires. You bring your envy to the community. You're not letting Christ do the work. Man, it cuts deep.
Not easy.
It's not easy. It's not easy. These conflicts and disputes among you, where do they come from? They come from your cravings that are at war, or do they not come from your cravings that are at war within you? You want something and do not have it, so you commit murder. And you covet something and cannot obtain it, so you engage in disputes and conflicts. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly, in order to spend what you get on your pleasures. And then, adulterers! Do you not know that friendship with the world is enmity with God? Therefore, whoever wishes to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God. Or do you suppose that the scripture speaks to no purpose? Does the spirit that God caused to dwell in us desire envy? And so we have this language that I think is really loaded for American Christians in the 21st century. Friendship with the world. What does that mean? How do we hear it used? JC.
It can be used kind of like if somebody thinks that they're doing everything you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, people who seek after whatever, like getting whatever they want, friendship with the world. Yeah. I've
Succumbing to all those enticing things out there.
Yeah. So I grew up in Houston, Texas, surrounded by Southern Baptists. So I usually heard the language of conforming to the world or friendship with the world. I heard that language used as, no, you can't go watch that movie because that's friendship with the world. Oh, no, you can't listen to this music. You can only listen to Christian music because that's friendship with the world. Or no, you can't vote this way because that's friendship with the world. Or you can't believe this or that because that's friendship with the world. Friendship with God is believing what we say we believe. And I'm less and less interested in what the SBC says that we should believe, right? But I mean that's the baggage I bring with me when I hear this phrase. And so I hear James friendship with the world, or Paul's Paul has an equivalent phrase that I'm blanking on, but it's very similar. And
Not conform to this world.
yeah, that's probably, yeah, conformity to the world. And so that's where my mind goes. But James, of course, isn't talking about anything like that. For James, friendship with the world is giving in to envy and selfish ambition. When you think about it, that's the engine that drives the world as we know it. Even, I mean, especially today. The thing that gets me the most about the way we've structured our society today is we've taken arguably the worst traits humans have, envy and selfish ambition, and we've said, let's build our society around that. I mean, that's consumerism, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And instead of saying, we recognize that we share this trait, let's build something that guards against that. We've said, you know what? Just let it all hang out. Just let it run free. It's the engine that runs the world. And so for James, this friendship with the world is falling into these self-serving patterns of behavior. And they destroy communities. And we've seen that. They destroy secular communities and they destroy communities of faith. JC?
It can both create and destroy.
Mm-hmm.
And so that makes it very powerful. But
yeah.
If we don't do anything to stop it, then it can keep going, and then the world can be completely different.
Yeah, it can create and destroy. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Well, and we talk about economic systems and economic patterns. We talk about as if they have an inherent goodness or evilness about capitalism or communism or socialism, whatever. But I mean, when you look at the history of let's say the last 100 years. And I've talked about this before. So you've got kind of the New Deal mixed economy, in the post-war period. And that led to this enormous economic boom that we see most clearly in the 50s, to some degree the 60s. So it starts falling apart in the 70s, right? You got the oil crisis, and you got a lot of stuff in the 70s. So out of the 70s, you have people and personified, you have a movement, and we'll personify it in Ronald Reagan. Personified in Ronald Reagan, they saw, okay, so this New Deal system is not working for us because the world, surprise, surprise, the world has changed in the last 30, 40, 50 years, right? This is not working for us. So we're going to remove regulations, and we're gonna, do this and that. And like JC was saying, it can create or destroy. So Reagan removed all of these roadblocks, and the economy just took off, right? You have this boom of the 80s, and then Clinton benefited from that. And not to say Clinton didn't do good things. It's not like he just rode the coattails of Reagan, but Clinton just kind of, made small changes and created what we call like this. It's called neoliberalism. Is this construct of this philosophy that Reagan put forward, and so and it served the economy well, but now it's kind of faltering because it's running the natural course of we're following the logical end of what Reagan started, which is the collapse in '08. That's what happens when you deregulate banks. Now we have incredible wealth inequality. Even here in the United States, more and more Americans are struggling to buy food and gas, and meanwhile Elon Musk is a trillionaire, right? And so it's not inherently good or bad. The system is not, but it works for a while, and then we have to change it. And so I don't know what the way forward is. But what's working, what we're doing now is not working, and we need to change it. It can create or destroy, there's not inherent value judgments here. But back to this friendship with the world. James is thinking of, okay, so there are behaviors that you practice to get ahead in a broken world. Selfish ambition, envy, gossip, speaking in anger. These are behaviors that are rewarded in the marketplace, but they destroy communities. And that's what James is talking about. If you want to be a friend of God, then you need to build up God's church. You cannot build up God's church through envy, selfish ambition, gossip, speaking in anger, etc. You might get, listen to the Rise and Fall of Mars Hill podcast. You might get some temporary success, but it's inevitably going to crash. It does every time somebody tries to build a church movement on these values. You remember all the televangelist scandals in the 80s?
Oh yeah.
It's the same thing. You build something on these friend of the world values, And yeah, you see some short-term success, but it's not sustainable. And then you think of the damage. I'm not convinced that the decline of religiosity in the United States, the decline of church attendance in the United States, it's not due in large part to the televangelism scandals of the 80s. Because now, the church is corrupt. The church pastors are corrupt. It's a huge part of why pastors have lost so much social capital is because of the scandals of the 80s and and Mark Driscoll doesn't help it. So friendship with the world. And then he changes. But God gives all the more grace. Therefore, Scripture says, God opposed the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. Lament and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning and your joy into dejection. Humble yourselves before the Lord, and he will exalt you. First thoughts, JC.
Kind of like changed the mood. Like it went from like overpowering to like a simple message.
Yeah. He goes from accusation to solution. Right? Yeah.
It isn't everything we've gone over, everything is we put the things of the world in our hearts before we pick God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And James's prescription is to humble yourself. That's his prescription to fix the problem. Humble yourself. If you humble yourself, God will give you grace. Humble yourself.
He's not going to give you a new jet.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Your mind on grace.
Yeah. Draw near to God and he will draw near to you, James says. Well, how do you draw near to God? Cleanse your hands, you sinners. We as a joke during COVID, we put that verse on slides all around the church. Yeah, I mean it's good practice, yeah. Yeah.
Oxygen.
Yes.
Clean your hands. 2, be good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cleanse your hands and purify your hearts. Now, cleansing your hands, you do things with your hands, right? So cleanse your hands of the things that you have done and purify your hearts, which Jesus says it's not what goes into the mouth that makes a man impure, but it's what comes out of his heart. So cleanse your hands and purify your heart. That's cleanse your whole being. Change what you think, what you want, and change what you do. And then he says, you double-minded.
Yeah.
Which we are. And you go back to James 3, where he says, look, do you bless God with the same mouth that you curse your brother with? Like you kiss your mama with that mouth, kind of, we're double-minded. We shouldn't be double-minded. And how do we cleanse our hearts? You lament and you mourn, you weep. That's repentance. Repentance is being like, man, I've done this thing and I need to take time to reflect on how it hurt people. It's one of the reasons that grief is so transformative. Because it's a time for reflection and change and transformation. And you can't always be happy. You can't always be joyous, although, I mean, scripture does encourage us to always be joyous. James says, you know what? Sometimes you need to reflect so that you can be better. Yeah.
One of the things that like can stop you from being joyous
Yeah.
is when other people aren't. And they take, and instead of understanding the reason that they're frustrated or sad, they take all that on other people, and then they can't be joyous and can't make others joyous.
Yep, you're absolutely right. People who can't self-reflect, who can't think, why am I unhappy?
Why am I having this bad day?
Why am I having this? They just take it out on other people. Happens all the time. We do it all the time, right? Yeah. You have to stop and you have to reflect. And so I pulled a couple of quotes. So this is straight from the commentary that I use. James 4:7 is the only reference to the devil in the letter. James reflects Judaism's acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. The devil is in no sense God's equal. There is but one God. James's spiritual dualisms gives the devil less due than is common in many conservative evangelical or Pentecostal circles. James lays responsibility for sin's origin squarely in the desires of human hearts. The devil made me do it. For James, the devil is an opponent. I think I cut something off there for space. The devil made me do it is not part of James's theology. Is what that should say. For James, the devil is an opponent who will flee if met with staunch resistance. The devil is resisted by rejecting that devilish understanding that drives those who serve self rather than serve God through demonstrations of mercy. Such faithful resistance in the struggle for God's cause is an important theme in the letter. So again, James has no, and this is why I don't talk about the devil or Satan or whatever in my preaching, because that's not who we're worshiping. Right. Yeah, Casey.
In church, we're learning about God and Jesus, but we shouldn't be learning about the devil.
Yeah.
The only thing we should learn about it is that we don't listen to the devil, we listen to Jesus.
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. Yeah. And so there are ancient religions that are dualistic. There's Zoroastrianism, which is an ancient Persian religion. Persia is modern day Iran. There are still Zoroastrians even in Iran today. Not many, but they're there. But Zoroastrianism says there's a good God and there's an evil God, and they're always fighting for influence. And Zoroastrianism was an influence on Second Temple Judaism. We do see some hints here and there, but Judaism largely influenced that full dualism. The second dualistic influence is a Greek religion called Manichaeism. Manichaeism is very similar. There's a good God and there's an evil God who are equally matched. There is a very, 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 probably one of the most consequential Christian theologians in history who is a Manichaeist before he became a Christian, Augustine of Hippo. And so he still carries some of that with him into his theology. I argue that conservative evangelical or Pentecostal circles are more Manichaean than anything else. I think ultimately when it comes down to it, they'll say, no, it's not conflict between equal forces. Obviously, God's going to win in the end. But you wouldn't necessarily hear that at first blush because of the emphasis and the power that seems to be given to the devil or to Satan in certain Christian circles. James has no use for that. James says, yes, there is this spiritual reality that opposes God's will and opposes, human flourishing, but it's not that powerful. It's not that powerful. Resist the devil and the devil will flee. Most of your problems are your own fault. And then here's an interesting one, just because we've talked about James having really harsh things to say about the rich. And this next slide is one of the few places where we really see any sort of hope for the rich, because James is before this point, James has basically said, yeah, if you're rich, you're in big trouble. This is really the only places we get a glimpse of hope for people who are rich in the letter of James. And so there is hope for the rich, but this is the only text in James where we see it. The condition is clear. They must be converted. That is, they must radically change their lives and purify their hands of unjust business practices. In other words, they must cease being rich. For the rich, for James, are those who oppress, who exploit, and who blaspheme the name of the Lord. As far as James is concerned, that's the only way to get rich, is by oppressing, by exploiting, by blaspheming the name of the Lord. And so the only reason, or the only way for James, the only way for the rich to be redeemed is to give up the envy and the selfish ambition that drives them to do these things that allow them to be rich. So, James, do not speak evil against one another, brothers and sisters. Whoever speaks evil against another or judges another speaks evil against the law and judges the law. And again, for James, the law is love your neighbor as yourself. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. And remember, early on, James says, do not be a hearer of the word, but be a doer of the word. James is saying, look, you cannot be a doer of the law, this law of love, if you're a judge. Judges can't be doers, apparently. I don't know. I'll have to talk to Debbie about that one. There is one lawgiver and judge who is able to save and to destroy. So who then are you to judge your neighbor? And so again, this circles around what we talked about in the beginning. It's really, really tempting for me to look at Elon Musk and be like, look at that trillionaire. Yeah. He's rich. Well, what does James say about how you get rich? And all of those things are true about Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But it's not my role to judge them on it, because I've got to work on myself. In order to be a doer of the law, in order to be a doer of the word, I need to work on myself. There is one who will already judge them. That's not my job. There's one of those pithy phrases that circulates around my Facebook profile or my Facebook pages every once in a while. If God didn't send his son to get in the world, he certainly didn't send you. You know? Right. You know? There's already a judge. a lawgiver whose job it is to save and to destroy. That job is taken. That's not your job. Who then are you to judge your neighbor? Now again, judging, we talked about this last week. Judging has two senses. On the one hand, we have to make judgments. We have to discern things. But our role is not to condemn. Our role is not to condemn. Ken Paxton, so James Tallarico, do you know who James Tallarico is? He just won the last month he won the nomination for a Democratic Senate slot. He's running up against not Paxton, not Corrin.
I thought the one who has all the scandals in his.
Yeah. Is it Paxton? It could be Paxton, yeah. But you know, the funny thing about Tallarico is Tallarico graduated from Austin Seminary last year in 24. He has a master's of divinity. He preaches, you know, and I think it was Paxton who said something along the lines of James Tallarico is going to hell because of his understanding of the Bible. Yeah, well, that's rich, especially coming from Paxton. You know, but that's rich coming from any of us to say that we get to set the standards.
My first granddaughter, who lives in Houston, is wanting to work in his campaign, and she's already got past the first step.
Yeah,
and she's waiting to hear. All the families coming in for Lexi's graduation this Saturday.
Yeah.
So we're waiting, Orange, waiting to hear if she's going to do this, because she'll be working.
Right.
And everything.
Yeah.
She's been, she served on an election board.
Oh, wow.
She was in high school.
Yeah.
And
interested
in things like that. So we're waiting to hear.
Yeah.
She does get that.
That would be a really neat experience. Yeah.
I'll have to be at my house. So.
Yeah. Yeah. So
appreciate the things like his writing that I've read.
Tallarico? I generally appreciate his person. I don't agree with everything Tallarico says. Tallarico comes out of St. Andrews in Austin. And I don't know much about St. Andrews, but I know of Jim Rigby, who's the pastor there. And Rigby, he says things, and I'm like, why aren't you just a Unitarian Universalist? You know, and so I do have that concern. That's between Rigby and God, right? But I bring that up because we're quick to jump to these judgments, and there is a pride that works inside of us that says this person believes differently than we do, they're going to hell.
Oh, let's go.
You know? And it is possible to go too far in the other direction. You know? But James is really clear. Worry about yourself. You have plenty to work on in yourself before you start worrying about other people.
Absolutely.
And we saw this in Hebrews. We see this Paul in Romans is really fierce about this. Paul says, look, when you're so worried about other people and their sin, you're blind to your own, and you can't work on your own sin. Again and again, worry about your own sin. Worry about the ways you're harming the community. Now, if somebody is harming the community, you need to take them aside and say, hey, like, you're hurting God's people, you know? But, yeah, so then, who are you to judge your neighbor? Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a town and spend a year there doing business and making money. Yet you do not even know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wishes, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Anyone then who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it commits sin. That's kind of a disjointed end to the chapter, that last verse. But as you read 13 through 16 at least, I think of Jesus's parable about the rich man who says, "Oh, my silo can't hold all of my grain. I'll build a second silo, and then I will be set to go forever." And Jesus says, "You fool, your life will be claimed from you tonight." It's the same thing. You almost hear James reinterpreting the sermons on the mount and the sermon on the plain. Because and first of all, he says, first, you don't know that you'll wake up tomorrow. First of all, that's up to God, not you. But second of all, it's shameful that all you can think about for the next year is making money. That's shameful, he says. Because, again, that's the envy and selfish ambition. Instead, he says, you should say, Lord willing, we will do this or this. All of our plans are contingent, because it may not be that, it may be that I wake up tomorrow, but maybe my car goes out and I can't do the things I want to do tomorrow, the things I have planned. Or it could be that I wake up tomorrow and the stock market crashes. Or it could be that I wake up tomorrow. Any number of things could happen that would disrupt my plans for tomorrow or next week or next month.
Yeah, Jason always said, you want to make God laugh?
Tell him your plans. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And so James says, look, you are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes.
They're just like a stardust.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Dust in the wind, right? Yeah. Yeah. If the Lord wishes, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. So there's the arrogance of one assuming, yeah, I'll live for the next couple of years and then I can go off and I can make all the money. As if you are in control of all of those things, right? Our sphere of control is very, very small. That's why I have very little patience with this myth of like the self-created man. I mean, every billionaire who's in the news, Trump got a $5 million loan from his dad in the 70s. Jeff Bezos's parents were already rich and gave him $6,000 loan or something. Elon Musk's family owned an emerald mine in South Africa. Like they had a little bit of help. And it does happen. People come from nothing, but it doesn't happen as much today as it did 50 years ago or 100 years ago. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But there's this boasting of I have all of this control. He says that's boasting, that's arrogance, and it's evil. His arrogance doesn't produce good fruit. Humility produces good fruit, James would say. All such boasting is evil. If God wills it, these are the things that I will do. That's what James encourages us to do. And then I don't see a really strict connection between verses 16 and 17. But there's that anyone then who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it commits sin, which is true.
But it just doesn't connect.
Right? It doesn't connect. I don't see a connection. Unless he's writing to a very specific circumstance that's lost to us, which is entirely possible. I can make some theoretical connections of between going off to such a town, spending a year and making money. Will you make that money by doing what you know is wrong? Perhaps that's a connection. But it's true. And it's James.
I have an extra
yeah.
commentary on verse 17. Intentions are not actions. When God prompts believers to do something good, they should obey with a sense of urgency. The time for obedience is now. In business terms, yesterday is a canceled check, tomorrow is a promissory note, today is the only cash on hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And we today we might struggle with verse 17 because we live in a world where we have a big scary word. You know what that big scary word is? Relativism. Relativism says that right and wrong are not absolute. Right and wrong are culturally conditioned. What's right in the United States is not right in Japan, which is true. They have very different cultural expectations.
But in God's eyes, right and wrong is the same.
Right.
That's the difference.
And so the question, anyone who knows the right thing to do and fails to do it, well, if I think that the right thing, what I think is the right or wrong thing to do could depend on where I live, my background, where I'm from, those sorts of things. But you think back to Paul, especially Paul says in Romans, I think it's chapter 11, no, it's chapter 12, where he's talking about, look, for some people, eating food that's been sacrificed to idols is sinful. For others, it's not. For some people, worshiping on Saturday is sinful. For others, worshiping on Sunday is sinful. There is some degree where we just have to do the best we can with what we have, with how the Spirit speaks to us. With that said, I think James is very clear that the guiding principle for ethical action is loving your neighbor. Yeah.
I was looking at 16, 17, and in 16 it says boasting and arrogance.
Mm-hmm.
So it goes back to the silo. The man's boasting, I have so much grain.
Right.
But then at 17, he failed to do the right thing because for me, I look at what you said and I thought, okay, you have too much. You're wealthy. Why don't you take some of that overage and help the poor?
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that's what God was hoping.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, let's build another silo and make more money.
Mm-hmm.
I see the arrogance connected to doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
He boasted, but he didn't end up doing the right thing. It's like Ray Kroc, who had
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's. He was just a very ruthless businessman.
Mm-hmm.
He died, and his wife said, I'm getting rid of all of it. She donated all the money. She did all the shit. Moses. And I see that in 17.
Mm-hmm.
They had all that money, but she looked over it and said, I'm going to do the right thing. And she gave just about everything away before she.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I see in a way the connection is there.
Yeah. And we talked about that last week or the week before, where
Mackenzie.
yeah, right. Well, yeah, Mackenzie Scott, who is is still earning money faster than she can give it away, but we talked about there seems to be a sense within James or maybe the whole arc of Scripture of God does set the stage for some people to be wealthy. But that is for the purpose of helping others. That is you are given wealth for a purpose, because it's not your wealth, it's God's wealth. And maybe God perceives that you need the character growth that comes from giving away your money. Because that,
Yeah.
it does. Because even when you have more money than you will ever be able to spend in your life, scarcity is scratching in the back of your head. What if I don't have enough for what tomorrow brings? And so maybe God says, you know what, this person needs the growth that comes from that. Well, and then when they don't, and to be fair, it's complicated by the fact that Elon Musk's $1 trillion is completely theoretical. He does not have $1 trillion in his bank account. He has $1 trillion in stocks that if he sells it for his $1 trillion, he crashes the stock market. Or at least his stock, right? Yeah, right, exactly. He crashes his stock, And so it's more complicated than all of that. But there's this really neat, he's this funny little guy. He does NPR's economic stuff. I forget his name, but he's maybe 30 and he's tall and lanky and he's just kind of like, he's just kind of like this. But he does like these short form videos that explains economic stuff just really, really clearly. And basically we have billionaires and trillionaires today because of tax changes made during the Reagan era. So basically companies get a tax break if they pay their CEOs in stock instead of cash. And then the CEOs are paid, actually they're paid in stock options, which is, you know what, we'll give you stock option. And so you can buy shares for $10 a share, even if at some point shares climb to $100 a share, you can still buy those at $10 a share. And it messes with the system. It's all really interesting. I like to learn things, but, all of that to say, money's not evil. It's the love of it, right?
And what you do with it.
And what you do with it. Yeah. So that's the end of chapter 4.